All right, crash course for soldering real quick. Solder station set to 650. 650 is for your typical soldering. You don't want to go higher than that for soldering. Tip, slant blade. It's gonna be good for your wires and basic stuff since you're not doing circuit cards. I'll show you on this. Focus. There we go. So that's what it should look like after it's tinned. It's all soldered together, one wire. Position this guy like that. All right. Loosen this up. We're going to do a sample. Cut this connector off, don't need that. Pull the wire out. Alright, so this is the wire I'm going to demo for you. I've already got one side done. So I'm going to do this side and we're going to pretend that these are two different wires and I'll solder them together. Find your size. You have it stripped. You have it spun together so it's nice and tight. This side's already been tinned, this side is not. So we gotta tin this side first. So, got that right here. Gonna go for the solder iron. Wipe it clean. Wipe it again here. Thermally shock. Now you're ready to solder. Take your flux core solder. It can sometimes help to do just a tiny little drip on the solder iron itself to help transfer the heat. You want to let that wire get hot just a little bit, and you should be able to start feeding the solder, and it should be melting. You might have to hold it there for a second, that's fine. Slowly feed it in, work your way up to the top. Keep slowly feeding, and work your way down and off the edge. All that extra stuff, you can literally just sling it off, and that's good for right now. That's now tinned. So, this side is tinned. We've already tinned this side. So now we're going to pretend these are two different wires and we're actually going to connect them, right? To do this, you're going to cross. You would take and fold over so that it makes like an M, basically. So now you have an M. Now you're going to pinch one side and you're going to finish rolling this around. If it's too thick and you can't get that last little bit, you can get a little pair of needle nose, try and help fold over some, but you don't need to go all the way, like that little bit sticking up. If it'll focus on it, it's perfectly fine. Now I'm going to pinch it on this side and I'm going to finish rolling this one around. Again, that little bit sticking off, that's perfectly fine. We got a nice wrap all the way around on that. It's definitely not going anywhere, so now we need to solder it. This is going to be a little bit harder to do with your really thick gauge wire, depending on how thick that wire is that you have there. 10 gauge shouldn't be too bad. Once you start getting to lower 8 gauge and stuff, then it gets really hard. So these already have a bunch of solder in them. Same thing for your iron. Again, every time before you solder, clean it, dry it, thermally shock. Get the flux ready to go. Now this time, same thing, a little bit of solder on your tip there, kind of in the middle of the blade, so that it's sitting there. That'll help transfer the heat when you touch it. You're gonna hold this on the underside. That's gonna heat up for a second. You're gonna feed a little bit more in. It should start to melt. That's it. Slowly pull it off, you're good to go. Now that's soldered. Another note, before you connected this into the M, you should have already slid on your heat shrink that you're going to use, unless you're using just electrical tape. Heat shrink's better. Electrical tape in a pinch if you have to. Just make sure it's isolated electrically from your other conductor. So at this point, you would take a pair of diagonal cutters. These are small precision diagonal cutters. This piece is soldered. Now you have those little pieces that were protruding up still that weren't able to be folded over. the cutting edge, the flat edge, goes towards the cable so that the 45 edge will push this away from it, and it won't leave a sharp edge. But you take this and you push it down flat, like so, and cut that off. Same thing on this side. Just kind of work right up to it. Make sure you don't cut the wire you just soldered, but just the end, just that tip off. You can see that. And that's it. So now you have a nice good solder. If you notice anything like really sticking up, like a sharp edge, you don't want it to poke through insulation. So you can clean up a little bit like that. That's a nice tight edge. It's not going to pull loose. It's not going to give you any issues. Rapid insulation. Say, for example, these were different wires now. So you have a wire here and a wire here. Pretend that this one is black and this one's red. If you have two wires like this, you have two splices. If possible, typically rule of thumb is you don't want these splices to be right next to each other. You want one splice here, you want the other splice offset. That way, if they were to rub through the sheathing, it's not going to short out on each other. It's less likely because there's the bulge here and there's a bulge here that are offset. Takes up less space, looks neater, and it's a little bit safer. Because you have short ends from battery, you might not be able to do that. It's not a big problem since there's only two. Just make sure that they're insulated very well. Heat shrink is best. Electrical tape can work, but not as recommended. If you do electrical tape, after you have the tape on there, go to the store, pick up liquid E-tape, liquid electrical tape. Rub that. It's a rubber coating, basically, you would coat over the electrical tape, just as a second coating. That's all there is.